it's Reagan, and today I'm here to do one of my most requested videos. I feel like every day I get a comment requesting this video, and today, my friends, I am delivering the goods. Today I'm gonna be discussing my all-time favorite fantasy books. Of all time, my favorite ones. I've actually done this video a few years ago, which I'll leave linked down below, but since then I've read hundreds of more books, most of them being fantasy, and I've actually read a lot of new fantastic fantasy that has quickly risen to the top of my favorites list. But I'm obviously not going to include any of the books that I included in that video, so if you're looking for Codex Alera or Mistborn, they're over there. So I'll leave that link down below for you guys. In terms of this video, I tried to keep all of the books that I am talking about to be series that I've either completed, caught up with all the books that are out, or read a lot of the books for me to feel like I have a rather good grasp of the world and how the story is going. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right in because I have a lot to talk about. Alright, so first things first, we're gonna start with the Mac Daddy. Probably my favorite book of all time, probably most definitely my favorite fantasy series of all time. A novel a lot of people were confused weren't involved in my last video, and that is because I hadn't read them. But I have now, and that is The Name of the Wind, or The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. If I was to recommend any fantasy book that you needed to pick up tomorrow, it would be this. This is the most incredible fantasy story I have ever read. It's lyrical, it's beautiful. Patrick Rothfuss takes our plot to places you couldn't expect. This is a story that's a saga. We follow a man from basically childhood to adulthood. We also visit him in the future or the present as he's retelling his past to a chronicler. Our main character, Kavoth, is a man of many skills and talents. He is both an incredible musician and magician, and we follow him across all of his insane journeys, and also the whole time we're wondering how he ended up to the point he is today, retelling the story. Like I said, could not articulate how beautiful this book is. My favorite fantasy story of all time. Seriously, I had to start with it because it needed to set the tone. It needed to set the tone. Moving on now to a series I feel like I haven't actually mentioned in a minute, and that is the Tearling trilogy by Erica Johansson. To me, this is one of the most unique fantasy trilogies of all time in terms of plot lines, character arcs, and where Erica brings our story to. You really go into the story expecting one thing. You're in a medieval fantasy setting. We follow our main character Kelsey, who has been kind of banished her whole life, and at the beginning of the story, when she turns 18, goes to claim the throne back from her evil uncle. And Erica Johansson just does a fantastic job truly bending your mind over backwards and combining so many different elements of genre into a classical fantasy setting, and then transforms that classical fantasy setting to something very else entirely. This is a fantastic trilogy. I wrapped up reading it this year, and I honestly could not speak more highly of it. Obviously, it's on my favorites. Moving on to a YA trilogy I marathoned earlier this year, and that is the Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy by Rae Carson. Rae Carson has fast become one of my all-time favorite authors this year, and this particular YA series to me defies all tropes and expectations to just the nth degree. This is an amazing and beautiful story that honestly, the character arcs that you experience through this is just astonishing. The first novel follows our main character Elisa, who is the chosen one. She was born with a godstone embedded in her stomach, and because of that she has become a huge religious symbol within her world. She also is a princess and honestly feels very ostracized. She, being a religious symbol and also kind of the second daughter to a royal family, just doesn't feel like she belongs. At the beginning of the first novel, she's married off for a political marriage, and that's where her story takes off. It sounds, again, like a conventional beginning. To describe Eliza's character arc through each novel is honestly one of the most inspiring things I have read. It's so incredible, and to see her transform and to grow up into a powerful woman is just such a fantastic read. This story also has a very interesting magic system and world that I found to be very refreshing, and again I felt like Rae Carson turned a lot of YA fantasy tropes on its ear, which made this story quite unpredictable. Next up, we have a recent favorite, and that is the Three Dark Crowns, One Dark Throne series by Kendar Blake. This is an amazing fantasy story that's much darker and much sinister than some of the YA I tend to recommend. This is a story that follows three sisters that live on an island. This island is a matriarchy. The queen gives birth to triplets and then she loses power. Each sister goes to a different faction on this island that has a different magical power, and they're all vying for political authority within this world. When the three sisters come of age, the way they take the throne is to basically kill off the other two sisters. This is a sinister story full of a lot of different perspectives and a lot of twists and turns you would not expect. It's deliciously dark and something that just honestly intrigues me to no end every time I turn the page. I just don't know where Kendra Blake's gonna bring it next. I have read the only two books that are out right now, but there is a short story coming out soon, which you best believe I'm gonna be picking up, and a third novel to this, which, to describe how much this book takes me by surprise, I honestly couldn't even tell you what could possibly happen next. This is a great, dark, rich, and very unique YA fantasy story that I could not recommend more. For sure, one of my favorites. Moving on to a hefty adult fantasy recommendation, we've got the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. This is my favorite Brent Weeks series by far, and one of my all-time favorite book series. It's just incredible. The magic system in this is what just makes it just amazing. Let me set these down, they're heavy. This particular series follows a huge cast of characters, from good to bad to middle ground people. We see them maneuver within this complex web of this political society, but as I've mentioned before, my favorite element to this series is by far the magic system. This is a world centered around magic wielders being able to use the spectrum of light. The more colors within this spectrum you can use, the more powerful you can be, and each color has kind of like a different manifested ability. However, the more the magic you use, the quicker you die. So there's like a double-edged sword element to this magic. One of our main characters is the Prism, and the Prism is this all-powerful political figure, but also like fighter for this world, and he can use every single color of light, which is very unique. But like I said, this is a very, very large story, huge world, massive war, conflict, multitudes of characters. It's a story that is massive and grand in scale, and it is very effective. Honestly, the light-centered magic system is just so cool and just done so well. The idea of using light at different abilities and then also it killing you ultimately creates so much interesting conflict. Such a great story. I want the next one. I've been waiting a really long time. Not that long, like a year. Which is not that long in the fantasy world, actually. But it's great. Next up, I have a duology to recommend, which I feel like is a rare thing to find in fantasy, as most of these series are very long. And that is the Six of Crow duology by Leigh Bardugo. This is a fantastic dark YA fantasy story that has a lot of really unique historical elements, I feel like, woven in as inspiration. This is a story that follows a ragtag team of criminals who, let's just say, aren't so morally pure, but they kind of have to band together to steal an impossible item to kind of like save the world a bit. The setting itself, I feel like, is so unique. It's this dark, medieval, fantastical world that kind of combines elements of 15th century Venice and the Netherlands into this fantastic, eerie town full of canals and merchants and conniving economic interests. Another fantastic thing about the story in itself is the characters. We follow, again, a very large cast of very unique and, again, morally gray individuals, but you begin to fall in love with each and every one of them for very different reasons, and they're all very distinct. They have their own voices, which makes reading this series so dang fun. It has a lot of personality, it has a lot of pizzazz, and a lot of great, you know, coat action. So, read it. Speaking of coats, I now have to recommend one of my most recent completed fantasy series reads that has fast become one of my favorite series of all time, and that is the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. This is a story that compounds on itself with every single book. The first novel is fun, full of adventure, lighthearted, great characters. Second book, we get a little darker, we get a little more invested. Third book, it's all over for you. This is a world that's centered around the fact that there are 4 parallel Londons. There's Black London, which was devoured by magic, no one can go to. There's White London that's slowly fading, magic is leaching out of the world, and power becomes the way to basically survive. There's Red London, which is flourishing, and there's lastly Grey London, which is essentially our world, which has no magic at all. One of our main characters, Kel, can travel between all of these Londons because he has a special magical ability, and that is kind of where our adventure starts. He stumbles upon a thief pirate in Grey London, he has conflicts with another person just like him in White London, and the world explodes and it's a fun, magical time. You're gonna love characters, you're gonna hate characters, you're just gonna wanna cry, curl up in a ball, scream for joy. This book series has it all. Victoria Schwab is one of my favorite authors, V.E. Schwab, and she has such a way with writing characters and the most rich and unique worlds. There's something like, you read them and they feel nostalgic somehow, even though they're a fantasy world, and you just want to go and visit, even if there's a whole bunch of crap going on. She also just does such a great job building relationships between very different people and showing how characters can grow and gain empathy through perspective. This is just a great story. I love it. There's gonna be more books in this series. That's all I have to say. Next up is a underrated fantasy series. I feel like the first book gained some traction, but I honestly have not heard many people read and finish this entire trilogy. But it's so good, and that is the Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. The first one is The Kiss of Deception. This is the prime example of plot progression through 3 books. The first novel is very kind of small in scale, and each book progressively gets larger and builds on the consequences of the previous novel. The first novel is a bit kitschy in idea, but it's actually very effective. We follow our main character who is about to be married off in a politically arranged marriage. However, she decides that she does not want to become a political pawn, so she takes her destiny in her own hands and runs away and just tries to become a normal girl in a normal tavern town. We follow her perspective, but we also follow 2 other perspectives. The prince she was supposed to marry and an assassin that was sent to kill her. Now, the prince and the assassin, we actually don't know who is who and which perspective we're actually reading from when we're reading from our main character's perspective. So there's a really interesting kind of mystery element thrown and woven into a larger fantastical world and setting. This is not a romance YA fantasy series. It might start that way a little bit, but the consequences of the politics that happen in the first book absolutely explode in the next 2 in this series. This is a story all about the complexities of war and misunderstandings between kingdoms, and also just the fact that people just might not understand each other, and it takes time to grow to love and appreciate someone, be it romantically or not. This is just such a great series full of very interesting folklore elements as well, and again, the growth of our main character through these 3 novels is impressive, but I have to tell you, she's one of the spunkiest and most full of spark main characters, and that's why I love her. She is always and will always tell anyone what exactly she thinks about them in that moment, which makes her incredibly refreshing. Alrighty, now moving into my last series I'm gonna say and recommend as one of my favorite book series of all time in the fantasy genre, and that is the Thief series by Megan Wallen Turner. This is another fantasy series I recently wrapped up. I'm talking like last week wrapped up, but has just exceeded my expectations, blown my mind, and just has done so well to my heart. This is a story set in a world very much modeled off of ancient Greece. In the first novel, we follow our main character who is a thief. In fact, not just any thief, but claims to be the best thief in all of the land and can steal anything. In the first novel, we find him in prison, and he basically cuts a deal with the kingdom for his freedom if he can go and basically steal an impossible thing. That is the start of the first book, but again, similarly to the Remnant Chronicles, the first novel basically sets up the world, and then the political system is absolutely cracked open over the next 4 books. But another element of the story that I feel is just so unique, and also something I just loved and appreciated, was again the elements of storytelling and history within this. There are gods, again kind of modeled off of this ancient Greek setting, and we oftentimes find characters telling stories, the origin of their own people. This adds such a unique and rich layer to the story as we grow to understand and become much more closely associated with the land itself. But also, I really love this story because it's full of a lot of different political kingdoms that we get to read from. We read from a lot of different rulers who have a lot of different political situations, meaning each kingdom has different problems, so each ruler has to correspond accordingly. They can't just You know, it's not like a one-size-fits-all political scheming. Another element to the story I loved and just could not talk more highly of is the fact that I feel like these characters outsmart me on every turn. And this is just a fantastic series that has existed for a long time. I think the first book came out in the late 90s, and there's more books coming out now. So this is just a story that is, you know, amazing. So alrighty guys, those are my favorite fantasy books of all time. I have a feeling this video is very long, but I covered a lot of ground. The like fantasy book tower that's currently standing next to me is pretty like hip height. Anyway, let me know down below some books you think I would love fantasy-wise based off of some of the books I talked today, because I'm always looking for recommendations. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!